As 2019 starts drawing to a close, 2020 looms on the horizon. New Year's Day is an exciting one for Doctor Who fans because Jodie Whittaker and all the gang are back with a fresh season of Doctor Who. Let's dive in today with Uber fan and TV man Rob McKnight.
Now, in its 7th year of podcasting, Trekzone presents a Trekzone conversation with your host, Matt Miller.
Well, he's back with me for the second time this year, and that's my mistake because we should get him back a little bit more. Although we haven't had too much Who to talk about this year, but it's coming in thick and fast. Mr. Rob McKnight, TV man in Australia. How you doing, sir?
I'm very well. It's fabulous to be here, Matt. What a disappointing year from a Doctor Who perspective, not actually having new episodes, but of course we're gearing up for New Year's Day when it's all going to start hitting.
And the worst part of being in Australia with the motherland back there so far behind us is that we've got to wait an extra day.
Oh, yes, of course. But obviously lots of Australians will watch it live. We'll watch it on iView as soon as it's available. Some will download.
You'll be, of course, watching it on iView at 4:55 in the morning, won't you?
That's right. Absolutely.
What are your hopes for this season? Obviously, Jodie Whittaker's back. The three companions are back. It's looking like a really cool series. What's got you hyped?
I'm really hoping that they've learnt some lessons from last series. I think it was a much bigger production than Chibnall expected, and I think he got caught out, which is why he needed the year to reassess and refocus. Doctor Who is a mammoth task, and I think we've seen that. Both Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat both had to take breaks while they were doing it. Of course, they got a few more seasons under their belt rather than just the first season before they scaled back production. So what I'm hoping to see is Whittaker more authoritative in the role, which I think was a bit of a mistake in trying to make her friendly and unsure. She lost a little bit of the Doctor Who character. And by that, I mean that we always expected, especially of the last few Doctors, they had this confidence, they knew what they were doing. She lost that a little bit, and I think that is now part of the Doctor's characteristics that I would like to see her gain, and especially with the transition to a female Doctor. I don't want them to underplay the power of the Doctor just because she's now a woman.
As a producer yourself, what does a year to make a season without any constraints of broadcast deadlines and stuff like that, what does that mean for a production?
Well, it means there's no excuses. So that's what that means. So any faults that with the show, they can't sit back and say, oh, well, we know we got this wrong, we know we got that wrong. What they've got to do is really take responsibility for what they deliver, good, bad, ugly, from this season. I've not been a drama producer, of course. My focus has always been live television, but I can't imagine having a year to sort anything out, actually. But I really just hope that they get the stories right. You know, like the first episode from Jodie Whittaker's was just brilliant, and you can tell that Chibnall spent a lot of time on that episode, and there was a lot of focus, and that was refined to just be a brilliant episode. The problem is he couldn't maintain the pace with the rest of the episodes. And while we obviously had some crackers like Rosa, you know, there were great episodes in there, but there were also some pretty bland ones, and character development was a problem along the way. You know, so I would like to see the characters fleshed out, the stories fleshed out, and really see a gang-busting season and a season where you want to watch it again straight away. And I didn't feel that way with Series 1. I watched that first episode so many times, and the next couple of episodes I rewatched a few times. I don't think I watched the last episode a second time.
Oh, wow. We sort of find this with Star Trek as well, with such a large ensemble cast that some of the minor characters, if you will, in that main cast sort of fall by the wayside in terms of character development and getting time to do stuff in an episode. Do you think with an expanded TARDIS that maybe they sort of fell into that a little bit with, you know, with four main cast members trying to find something for everyone to do and pair off and this sort of thing?
I definitely think that was an issue. If you look at it, Naz had a perfect episode for character development when she saw her grandmother's wedding. You know, that whole episode was the perfect time. But if anything, she was the least character to get any development. The relationship between Ryan and Grandad had more development in every episode rather than as in any episode, even the ones that focused around her and her family. So obviously, I think we will see a lot of development with that character this season, because that has been the biggest criticism of this season from fans. So I think Chibnall would have taken notice of that. I'm hopeful going into this season. I really am. And if they've stuffed it up after taking a year off, I think Chibnall should call it quits. And I actually have a suspicion he will call it quits after this season. I think Doctor Who has turned out to be much harder than he expected. You don't take a year off to try and catch up after you've launched the first season, because you actually should be trying to go for momentum. So I think unless he's refined the process, and I think unless he's delivered something spectacular, I actually think he might call it a day.
So do you think there should be almost another season next year, towards the back half of next year, to build that momentum and sort of get Doctor Who back into the consciousness, like we've got with Star Wars and The Mandalorian and the new movie coming up, Star Trek with 3 or 4 series in development and production? Is this sort of where Doctor Who should be sort of taking it? Do you feel that there's a slice of the pie that the BBC are missing out on?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And of course, they've tried that with Torchwood in the past. And you could see a spin-off series with Jenna Coleman, and when she went off in her new TARDIS at the end of of her final episode. While I would love to see 2 series in 2020, I'm happy to wait and keep it starting with a New Year's event. They've moved away from the Christmas event. Chibnall's trying to differentiate himself, and I get that. I don't have a problem with that. So the idea of a New Year's Day episode leading into a season, I'm actually down with that. So if they maintain that for the next couple of years, I'm happy. But yes, I would absolutely love a second series this year in 2020, but that's obviously not going to happen.
And there's some notable guest stars coming up. One of the big ones, of course, and we've seen that in the sneak peek that the Beebs has released. Stephen Fry is in the show. So they're pulling some big names.
Well, Doctor Who is loved in Britain, so I think it's easier to pull in those big names because they all want to be able to say, oh, I've done Doctor Who too. And especially now that it's not that cheap as chips TV show that we all used to love and adore back in the day in the classic series, it really now has a filmic quality about it, and it's not an embarrassment to appear on Doctor Who, and it's also something you can just tick on the CV. And so I think it is easier to get those stars, and I think it's interesting to see how they play and what they do. One of the biggest failures, and I love her. I've always been a huge Kylie Minogue fan, but her performance in the Christmas special that she did, it was terrible.
So, Rob, they're going back to 2-part episodes now this season with a 10-episode season. So we're probably looking at about 5 storylines. Is that a good move, bad move?
I'm not a fan of the 2-parters unless they're really, really compelling. I don't want to see 2-parters just for the sake of doing 2-parters if there's a reason for it. And isn't it interesting? We see this happening with Stephen Moffat did it. One year he made this proclamation, we're doing 2-parters now. He did that for a season, then went back to just doing 2-parters when they were warranted. And I think that is absolutely the key. There's no reason they shouldn't be able to tell the stories in 50 to 60 minutes. Sometimes there is a great reason for doing it as a 2-parter, but the Doctor Who series since 2005 has stood up really well with being 1-parters. So I'm certainly not a fan of doing 2-parters just for the sake of it. What about you, Matt? What's your feeling on the 2-parter?
I think that it does. It creates this need to stretch things out probably more than they need to be. As you say, if there's a warranting or if there's a reason for having it as a 2-parter, maybe it's a big story, but it's a big call to do that week in, week out. Obviously, from a marketing perspective, it's really good because it will hopefully hook people in at the end of episode 1 to episode 2. But then, of course, you reset yourself in the 3rd week and the 5th week and so on. So I'm not quite sure on that perspective, but maybe with a year to make production, there's some really good stories, and there really is a reason to have 2-parters this season.
And how are you finding Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor?
Oh, I love her.
So do I.
It's such a
I love her.
such a breath of fresh
I
air.
love her. I've got no problem with a female being in the role. I just think she needs to capture that authority of the Doctor.
And that's always, it really is a tough thing to do in your breakout season, and then to have a year off, especially. We keep sort of coming back to that. But breakout season, following on from the likes of David Tennant and Matt Smith, Peter Capaldi, there's some tough names to follow. The Doctor, as you say, is such a revered character in the UK and around the world that they're big shoes to fill.
And look, we've also got to acknowledge some of the changes Chibnall made were really fantastic. The incidental music, the filmic quality to the whole production. From a production point of view, the show really has evolved, and that will keep it going and the momentum going. The problem is obviously everything. It doesn't matter how good something looks, how good something sounds, it comes back to story. And so this is going to be the key. Getting the story right. The story and the Doctor are the two key elements to Doctor Who. And so, or anything really, your main character in your storyline. They've got to make sure Jodie is owning the role, and they've got to make sure she's got the stories around her and the great writing around her to make it work.
Fantastic, Rob. Well, it's going to be an exciting season of Doctor Who, the 12th one of the reboot, which is a bit odd considering it's been going for 14 years, but that's what happens when you take a 12-month break. We mentioned it again.
I know, and I'm going to be travelling, so I may not see the series until February. Is it just a New Year's Day special and then we are getting a series later on in the track, or is it going straight into the series?
No, I believe it's going straight in. So they're
it's going to kill me.
Episode 1 on New Year's Day, and then episode 2 on the Sunday night for the UK. And the ABC's holding them over and doing them on Thursdays. Thursdays at 8:30, I think it is.
Bad call. So it's going to rate terribly if they do that.
Yeah, well, and that's an interesting one. From our perspective in TV land, they are releasing at the same time as the UK on iView, but they are holding it over for 3 days for broadcast, which I agree with you is a bad call and might possibly sign the death warrant for Doctor Who on television. Although we're in summer non-ratings, so I don't think the ABC really cares too much.
No, it's certainly a brand that they don't have a lot of faith in, and obviously the ABC were given the chance to own a piece of the revised series of Doctor Who, and they didn't take it and then had to buy the rights. In fact, it was the Canadian broadcaster who did the co-pro with the BBC when it was relaunching in 2005. So the ABC didn't see the value then. It was doing well on the ABC, but I think that it depends what their game plan is. If they're trying to migrate us all over to ABC iView and digital is the future, there's a whole discussion going on in the TV world about what the future of TV is. Maybe that's part of that plan, because Doctor Who is a big draw card for iView.
Fantastic, Rob. Well, it is always fun to talk Who with you, and we should do it more next year with an actual season to talk about.
Anytime, mate.